All right, I think that may just do it. I'm still getting used to this new streamy web page YouTube thingy, if you know what I mean. I just spent a bunch of time. I used my MacBook over here to control the live stream, panel that YouTube has now, so that I can use various other computers for various other reasons. And I thought that the stream key was going to change for every stream, based on how the setting is auto generate. But I guess auto generate means one time and not every time. So that's the thing. Everything seems to be working all right there. Pardon me. I just checking this stuff out. Hopefully this will go well because I spent a large part of my free time this week compiling and recompiling OBS, trying to get various features that I'm not currently using enabled. And what I've learned from this is I am not necessarily a fan of CMake per se, but I got there in the end. So hopefully everything still works fine. I did some tests earlier. It seemed to be okay, so we will see what is happening. Hello, Ashwin. I'm trying something a little different here. I have an extra, not that I don't have enough laptops on the desk already, but I have a tablet down here to try it. So hopefully while I'm looking at something, I'll notice chat happening down there as well as over there. And out of my peripheral vision, slightly better chance that I might actually see something. So what is the plan for tonight? Oh my gosh, that's just the exact sort of thing that we need to wonder about, isn't it? If you remember last week, I played a little bit with override audit and its context menu type action. I thought that worked out not too bad. I have a commit queued up for that. That's going to need a lot more work, but it's a proof of concept. I liked where that was going, but I backed everything back to the next release version, so that's not currently active here. So the next thing to work on is something akin to this. Now, if we generate one of these override reports, this is just a list of every package that has an override currently. And sometimes one of these overrides might potentially be expired. And in the parlance of override audit, what that means is that, oh, I guess you can't actually see that because I haven't done the other part yet. Sorry about that. I'm not used to having a webcam actually on me. Hang on a second. Allow me to appropriately press the correct button to start this stream, and then we'll get going. This one. There we go. Okay. Could go slightly smoother, but only the second stream, public stream with a webcam, so that's so good. So anyway, as I was saying before anybody could tell, because you were just watching me look at a screen like a doofus, this is an override report. This is showing us a list of all of the packages that currently have overrides, and what that means is these are packages that have they're installed or shipped, but they exist as a Sublime package file. And also, there's an unpacked folder with some files inside of it, and those files represent folders inside of the Sublime package file. And as a result, the version in the unpacked version of the package is overriding the one that comes from the Sublime package file. Now, when this happens, of course, Sublime always uses that particular file. For example, the default.sublime commands file. This is an installed package. For package resource viewer, there's also unpacked files, and particularly there's a file named default. And that means that this is a file that lives inside of that particular package. And if we were to give this the correct focus, and remember that there may still be some action left over from that code that did not reload. Hang on a second. Let me just do this. I reverted the change, but I didn't reload the plugin after I did it. So the loaded version of the plugin is not the thing. Or my copy of Sublime is horribly broken. Let's see. Nope, that was it. Okay, so if we edit this override, this is the version of the file that exists in there, except that I have changed these two items to have commands that don't exist, which hides them from the command palette, because if you pick extract package, you override an entire package, and God help you if you pick extract all packages, you override every file and every package, and good luck ever getting an update for any package ever again. But it's possible for these packages to actually be updated, right? For example, package resource viewer could be updated by its author, or we get a new build of Sublime and the Python package changes, which it might. And if we happen to have a resource inside of one of these packages that we're overriding and the package also updated it, we won't see that because Sublime always uses the unpacked version of the package. Hence the idea of the whole override audit package to begin with, but also the idea of the this is an override report, the expired override report, which marks resources that have been updated by the source package. And probably the best way to demonstrate that would be to jump over to, say, here and say touch python.sublime build 10 years ago. I think this is how you do it. It's been a while since I've played with it. Okay, so with that done, if I was to refresh this report, there's an X next to python.sublime build here, right? And the reason for that is override audit knows when, it even says it in here, it knows the date and timestamp of the package file itself and of the files that are inside of it, because it's just a zip file and zip files carry date information, and it knows the relative date and time of this date on disk. So if this package file, or particularly the file inside of it, is newer than, modified more recently than this file, then this package has been updated, and as a result, this is potentially expired. It could potentially be masking changes. And in such a case, this would happen after packages update themselves. One of the features of override audit is when a package gets updated and when Sublime restarts and the version number changes, it does a test to see, it'll do something like override report only expired, like this, which shows you only the things that are potentially expired. And if there's nothing in the list, nothing happens. If you've ever seen the information in the status bar, it says no packages with expired overrides found. That's an example of this running. I think we can even see it here. In this particular case, it decided that the Sublime version was unchanged, i.e. the last time I ran it, the Sublime version was whatever this is, 4062, and this time it was 4062. So Sublime didn't update, so it doesn't need to do a check. But if the version number changed forwards or backwards, or a package leaves the list of ignored packages, then that could be because package control updated it. And in that case, it does this particular check. And it's going to give us this. Now, there's only one of them here at the moment. So the general workflow for this would be you'd pop in here and pick diff override and look and see exactly what is different between your version of the file and the underlying file. We can see here the red lines are the shipped version of the package and the green ones are mine. We can see I pretty much just modified the Python 3 there. We could also edit the file, and due to changes made in the most recent-ish changes of override audit, we can utilize the mini diff functionality to actually see exactly what changed inline right in the file while we're editing it, and do something like that to see the same action. And then we might decide, okay, well, these changes are fine. Sometimes you might decide, oh, I was overriding this because there was a bug that has been submitted, say, in a pull request by the author of that particular package, or by someone to that author, I should say, rather, and it hadn't been merged yet, but you could make those edits yourself, so you gain the benefit of that bug fix. And then when the update actually happens, your version of the override is exactly identical to the underlying file, but it's newer, in which case you no longer need it. You can right click and pick delete. And often the time something like this might happen is the packages that ship with Sublime, the language packages, the syntax files for those packages are available on GitHub. And those are just always in a state of change to some degree as the community helps to maintain them. But they only update in Sublime at the next dev build or the next full stable release, depending on which channel you're in during that operation. And in that case, you might come into the forum and say, I'm having a problem with the Python syntax. There's this particular situation where it's not highlighting things correctly. And the response comes back, that's being fixed in this commit. It's ready for the next release. And the next release is, we don't know when. So you could just live with the bug, or you could go to GitHub and find that updated syntax file, drop it in here, and you're good to go. And then when the release actually happens, now your override is no longer needed. There's a lot of scenarios where that sort of thing can happen. Sometimes, like this, for example, this is a contrived example, but we might come in here and say, okay, well, the package file changed in as much as it's a new package, and the author, like, say, repackaged the package file before they submitted it or something along those lines. But the actual changes are still fine. There's nothing I need to worry about here. And in that case, there's a few things we can do. We can right click on this package and say, freshen expired overrides in Python. And that's going to ask, do you want to do this? And if I say yes, it's going to look at every single one of those expired files and basically touch them on disk to update their last modified time so they become newer. They become the time that's now, so they're newer than the package. It's no longer marked as expired. If you didn't want to do it that way, then you could right click on one of these things and choose to freshen a specific override like this. And imagine how much nicer this would be using those changes from last week, where this context menu has just the override audit things. They could be grouped a little nicer. They don't have that override audit text on them, all that sort of thing. And this is the same sort of thing. It's asking me, do you want to do that one file? But it only does one. So there's actually one other thing we could do here, and that is to choose revert this override like so. These commands are also available from the command palette, by the way, and up here in this menu here where appropriate. When in doubt, the command palette has all sorts of cool stuff like revert current override. That also asks you if you want to do it. And the revert thing was actually asked for by Keith Hall from the forum, a good friend of mine, because he's one of the people that works a lot on the syntax definitions on the GitHub repository that I was just talking about. And in that case, he might have a version of the Python syntax that he's making changes on, and he has that entire Python package from the GitHub repository linked into his packages folder. So he's using the whole package while he's updating the syntax, right? And then someone comes along and says, hey, I'm having this particular problem. Can you help me? And before you answer that question, you want to make sure your version of Sublime is the same as what that other person would be, i.e. that Python package is, shouldn't be that one because you want it to be the same version as the one that the person is using. And what you could do is revert all of the overrides. All that command does is take the file out of the Sublime package file and write it on top of the override. It leaves the override in place. And that's handy because all those packages are in Git. So you could totally do later on, a Git checkout minus minus, or, use Sublime merge or whatever, get all the changes back because you've saved them in Git. It's a very quick way to fiddle packages back and forth in that particular case. But what happens if what if all of these packages here, except for package resource viewer, which is an installed package, when the next version of Sublime pops in and all of these file packages have changed? This is a small number of overrides. You could potentially have a bunch of them, and every single one of them is something that is potentially expired, right? Well, one thing we could do there is we could come over here to bulk diff all packages like this. This is going to give us a list of every override in every package, right? So then we can use folding. So we can look at this one and say, that one's okay, fold that. This was something that doesn't even exist in the package, so that's fine, that's okay, fold. Okay, this whole file is done, fold. This whole package is done, fold. Go through all of them. You've decided at some point through here, there's maybe some of these files that need to be refreshed, or maybe they don't even need. Like, for example, this is an override that's not changing anything. So if I wanted to, I could just delete it and it wouldn't be there anymore. And what you're left with at the end is a bunch of overrides that are still, say, expired, but they're expired in a way where you don't care. Like, this is expired, but I want this to be the case. For whatever reason that I thought that Apple script should have a different kind of comment start. Presumably I was working on something diff related and wanted a package close to the start of the alphabet. Well, we could right click on this and pick freshen, and then right click on this and pick freshen, and then right click on this and pick freshen, and then right click on this and pick freshen. That would work, and it's pretty crappy user experience overall if there's a lot of them. So what's a good way around that? And one of the ideas I've had for this, which isn't the thing we're doing tonight, is a take on how there's general support in override audit for marking up overrides. And the two examples of marks are this. This one is marked with an X to know that this is an expired override. And this one's marked with a question mark to let you know this is a file that exists in the unpacked package, but it doesn't exist in the Sublime package. And that could be because it's something that you've added, like presumably the package resource viewer package doesn't have a sample.txt file in it. Why would it? But something like this could be because this package used to have a file named miscellaneous.tm preferences, and we had an override on it. And then the package updated, and as a part of that update, the new version of the package doesn't have a miscellaneous.tm preferences. Well, now this resource file is just hanging here. Maybe it should be here, maybe it shouldn't. Important for us to know. But what if we had the ability as we were coming through this report to hit on these things and push keys, like push D and say, I want that one to be deleted. I want this one to be ignored. I want this one to be freshened. I want this one to be deleted, and so on. And then when you get to the end, you hit a key and away you go, and it would do all of those actions all in one big bulk thing. That's sort of the ultimate goal of what we want for maximum usability, if you will. But one other thing that is potentially cool, this is sort of why this is a test of playing around with this particular functionality, is what if we could come to the command palette here and there was a thing in here that said freshen overrides, which only appeared if you were in an override report that had at least one expired thing. And as a part of that, it could show you a command sort of in the same way that this does. I don't have an example for this yet. A list of, say, every package that has expired overrides or every expired override. And you could say, I want to freshen this one, and you hit enter and it chooses it. It adds it to a list. And then it comes back to this and shows you another, you can choose another one. I could pick arithmetic and add that to the list of things that should be freshened, and so on. And maybe you could come back to one that had already been marked as being freshened and hit it again to say, I don't want to freshen that one, and it would come out of the list. And then when you're done, you choose, say, an item at the top of the list that says execute or something, and that's what triggers it to go. And there's two different kinds of input handlers. I guess for that we should probably do a little bit of this. There's a list input handler. Oh, actually, is there a list input handler? Yeah, sorry, there's a and text input handler. Text input handler is something that allows you to just enter a piece of text in there. And an example of that would be, do I have a key for that? Yeah, probably this one. I can create a bookmark, and this is an example of a list input handler. It's providing me a list. What's the type of bookmark I want to create? Do I want to create a bookmark for this particular file, or do I want to create a bookmark for this particular view? And I say this view. And there's also a little preview area, as we can see down here. You can put XML in here and put whatever you want in there realistically, as long as mini HTML can render it. And you pick one, and now we're in the next thing, which is the name for this bookmark. And this one has a default, that's the name of this particular help file. But we could type any text we want in here, any text we want, like this, if I could type. This is an example of a text input handler. There's no input for multiple selection list input handler. Probably doesn't come up that often, and maybe it's not a good idea to do it. Maybe the developers of Sublime had that as an idea and decided they didn't want to do it. It's hard to say, but we could play with it and see. Clearly, one way that we could pull this off is to have a list of items there and just manually make the person type the name of the packages they want separated by a comma or something. That doesn't seem particularly nice overall. I think the better idea to do it is this way instead, where you allow someone to choose from a list. That seems a little bit nicer. And we also have the ability to do that. I'm not entirely sure what that gets us because the command is gone now. I was curious based on the idea that I have for how this could work. That might be, all right, well, maybe that would have worked. I was curious what happens if there's more than one argument and you try to backspace over one of them, because backspacing over the command takes you back to the command palette again, where you could choose a new command if you wanted to do something. And note that the thing that you see here doesn't have to match the name of the item here. For example, hyperhelp create bookmark is what it's named there, but it just says create bookmark here. You don't need to know that you're doing it for a particular package, right? And what are the ways that we could pull this off? And I think I had an idea for a couple of different ways to do it. One would be a list. Well, I guess they're both sort of a list of items, but one is perhaps more hacky than the other. So let's go ahead and give it a jingle. I guess for this purpose, we don't technically need this override audit window, so we might just go ahead and do that and maximize that and bring the help up. Whoops, put that over there and say we wanted a new plugin. And this could also be, if you're unfamiliar with input handlers and how they work in general, might be a good primer for that sort of thing as well. You know, to sort of pad out the length of the stream if somebody doesn't have otherwise a question about Sublime. So let's say, for example, we choose text input handler first. Oh, and there's totally a bug in there. The list input handler has a method next input that takes another instance of list input. Yeah, that's exactly sort of the thing that I was thinking of doing. What if the list input handler returns another instance of itself, which requires a command that's configured a certain way because it would end up with multiple arguments? That's the first way I thought of to do it, actually. So good on you for coming up with that as an idea. I also have another idea for it, but that's the one we're going to try first and see what happens. That is annoying. I can't. Side trip. Let's do a little bit of this. And what was that again? That was text input handler. There's a little bit of extra crap on there that doesn't need to be on there. That's annoying. So let's save that. Is that in the... It's been so long since I've worked on this package. Let's see if I remember if... yeah, do that. If this works the way that I think it does. Oh, look, see, there's an example of override audit in action. There you go. In order to bootstrap hyperhelp, because it's a package that comes from a dependency, it adds hyperhelp to the list of ignored packages before it writes to it, because otherwise Windows will grab you about the collar and slap you firmly in the face. And once it's done, it removes the package from that, and as a result of that, that is what makes override audit say, hey, let's take a check and see if there's any override or any expired overrides. And as a result, that pops up. And did that fix this by any chance? Yay. Okay, that's cool. We can close this now. I like to find those particular issues where possible. So in order to do something like this, we can leave this as example command. That can still be a text command. Commands don't need to be a particular type of command in order to use an input handler. What they do need to have is an argument of some type, like say message, for example. And for our purposes here, well, I guess we could just do this, couldn't we? So that's the simplest way to do that. And we'll say text, let's say input handler tests, let's call it. Just because I have a tendency to name packages untitled, and now I'm up to like untitled 2 or untitled 3 because there's stuff I want to fiddle with there. That is not trimming white space like it is supposed to. That's sort of annoying. Another side trip into preferences. Oops. Preferences settings. I'm pretty sure I have trim trailing white space on save turned on. Yep. That's not the one. Trim only modified white space. Let's try turning this off for the time being. Save that. There we go. That's probably more like how I want it to work. There seems like there might be an edge case there because technically this whole file was modified and I added some spaces in there and then did stuff. But well, we'll worry about that at another time. So we have a command here named example, right? So if I said view.run command example, it's going to get mad at us because it requires an argument of message and there isn't one. So it gets mad. Actually, we're going to also change this to view.cell 0.begin instead. Just so that it works the way one might expect. Save that, and if we came here, if we gave it an argument, if we gave it a message, like so, then, boo. Shame on me. Type stuff in the input handler, input in the console, type stuff in a command, forget self 100% of the time. Now it's inserting it in the wrong place, but that's okay. So that's an example of doing that, right? So our command works, and we want to have it interactively ask us what that argument is. We want to have that command in the command palette. So we have to have this command in the command palette to be able to do that. And for our purposes here, I'm just going to use the user default Sublime commands because I have a lot of stuff that I've added to my own file here for the things that I tend to use myself that aren't in there by default. And some of them, like these ones, are plugins I've created. But I create so many plugins that I don't want to have to keep going to that menu all the time, and so on and so forth. So, whoops, was my numlock turned on? No. Okay. We need an entry in here for example command. Oh, actually, we'll call it an example command like this because then it floats to the top of the list. Oops, and the command we want is example, right? Like so. And now I think we should see an example command. And if we chose it, nothing happens, right? And if we look in the console, it's because it requires that argument that we didn't give it. So this is where the whole input handler thing comes in. We have to say, define the input method like so. And for our edification, we'll do that and say this is the text input handlers version of the, oh, sorry, this is the, not that one, it's the text command version, pardon me. Okay, back over to here. So it needs to return an instance of command, and what it actually gets is the list of all the arguments that this command was given, which right now is none, right? So we could say if message not in args, then return message command input handler, like so. And then we need a class for that, right? So we need a class message command. Didn't practice this at all, by the way. And it needs to be a text input handler like so. That's enough to make that work-ish, but I'm pretty sure if you do this, nothing exciting will happen for you. We can now say the thing we want, the thing, and it got an unexpected keyword argument message command. And uh, this is one of those things, the way that example command becomes example as the command, message command input handler becomes message underscore command. Both cases, there's a name method that is doing the conversion from the class name to the underlying name, and it turns all of the sequences of uppercase letters to underscore and lowercase, except for the first uppercase letter. If the word starts with an uppercase letter, that one just lowercase. So it ends up as the snake case version. And then if it trails underscore command or underscore input handler, that part is thrown off. So this is assuming that the argument that it's returning is named message command, but it's not, right? So one way to fix that would be to rename this and rename this. Whoops, that's not the key that does that. And then that would work a little better for us. We can see it working right there. And the other way you can do that is by changing the name of this argument that there's a there we go. Can't push the correct key. We need to go back one to text input handler is the name method. You can make this return whatever you want. So we could also do the same thing by doing this and saying, oh, def name and return message. Incidentally, can you tell that my dog is in the hallway being angry that people are walking past? I'm not sure how well the headset carries noise from that far back, but I've always been curious. And now that we've done that, even though that this is the wrong class name, if you will, then we could do this. The message goes here, and there we go. So that's another way to do that. And I think this is something that you mentioned, Ashwin, that you discovered that you don't actually have to have the command or the input handler hanging off of the end. That's because the default name method for both of these things does that for you. It removes it if it's there, but if it's not there, it doesn't matter. And as a matter of fact, if you wanted to, and it's not really advice to do this, you could say something like class here, and then say that is a Sublime plugin text command, like so. And then we say run, and it gets an edit. And now clearly, what would this be named? This would be a command named here, right? But what if we said this? Now we could say view.run command example2, whoops, and spell it correctly. And it still runs this command anyway, even though its class name doesn't match the name of the actual command. Highly not a good idea to do this because it's just confusing in general to you and others. And for the same reason, you don't have to add command to the end because it'll be thrown away. But if you're doing something like this and looking at the symbol list, then you can easily tell that this is a command and this is a command based on their names, and this one, whereas this one is not because of the suffix that it has. The demonstration is sort of moot in a file with only 3 classes. But if you were doing it in something like the global symbol list on a large package, then it would be easier for you to just say command and filter to all of the command classes, which you can't do if your class doesn't trail the word command or input handler or what have you. You definitely can't do that if you're relying on the name of the thing, the name method to return the name of the command. So That's usually why we do that, and I try where possible to remember to add the command, but as being pointed out in at least one video, some plugins that I've created don't do that, particularly some of the ones in the Sublime Scraps repository, because they go back all the way, some of them, the initial version back to 2016, and sort of over time as I've gone on, I've sort of um, come to my own style for, or embraced a new style, if you will, for how I lay out my code. For example, the Pythonism of having classes 2 lines apart. As a matter of fact, it took me a while to get used to the idea that the parentheses should be here and not here like this, because for the better part of 2 decades as a C programmer, I preferred to have it that way and not this way. But it seemed to me as I was learning Python that this is sort of the Pythonic way to do it, is the way I like to say it. So I'd sort of adopted that style, and my code style has changed a little bit. Sometimes that sort of thing still slips through. I might forget to add a command to the end of the thing or something along those lines. But I try not to fall into that particular trap. So let's go ahead and fix that this way. So that puts it back to the way we had it before. And that's all working good. So that's an example of a text input handler. And there are various other, this method doesn't need to be here anymore, but we could do something like placeholder like so, and say the message to print or insert, let's say. And then when you pick the command, you get that little placeholder hint behind it to give you an indication of what it is that the thing is actually asking you for. Another thing that you could return is initial text, right? Where you could say, hello world, and then that goes there, but you could backspace over it, get the message. These are the sorts of things you can use to build this up. The preview method, as we can see over here, is for displaying some sort of preview underneath of what this command would do. And an example of that that's built into Sublime is the arithmetic command. If we did something like this, there's 2 of those there now. We hit the arithmetic command, and we can see 1 comma 2 because it's doing that. And if I said I plus 5, now we know that the answer that's going to be inserted is 5 and 6, like so. Or if those were already there and they were selected like that, and we ran the command, now it's x, we could say x times 2, and we know that the answer is going to be 10 and 12 when it gets inserted. That's an example of using that preview text there. And of course, for the interested arithmetic, that command is right here, which is also another, the built-in example, if you will, of text input handlers, showing the placeholder and the input text and how you would go about returning the preview string that you would like to insert into the thing. And it also shows that we can do things like invalidate. Validate things. So if you return false from this, then the user is not allowed to press enter in their command handler, right? If we did something like def validate self text and return text is not equal to hi, then if we ran the command like this, if the text was hi, no matter how much you press the key, it won't go in. So you could use that to validate that what the user's typing actually makes some sort of sense. In this case, it's pretty easy to subvert that. So those are the sorts of things that we can do there. And we can also be told when the user canceled. That means they did this and didn't want to do anything. Basically, if that input handler was on the input handler stack, which is what happens if there's more than one argument, there's sort of like a little stack of them that allows you to go forward and back through the list. Then you get told when it's canceling. So if you did something like store memory somewhere, you'd know it's time to free it, something along those lines. And similarly, This is the one that gets called after the user has confirmed the text has been validated. You know that's going to be the argument. Those are the sorts of things that are going to play into our little example command here. But again, we want to be able to display, I mean, for our purposes here, an example of using a text input handler for the problem I'm trying to solve would be you type an example command and then you'd have to say something like Python HTML package dev, and you'd have to type them correctly. You can't autocomplete in this panel. You might be able to tweak settings to get it to go, but I wouldn't bet on it. And that's not the greatest way to do that anyway. It'd be nicer to have that list of packages or list of files or something, right? How might we go about that? And one way is the way that Ashwin mentioned in the comment there, which is you can chain these input handlers together. And we could say we need to have more than one argument for our command in that particular case in order for that to work, right? And we might say prefix message like this, say. And then we could come up here and say class prefix input handler, and that's a text input handler. And well, let's go ahead and just, we don't want that. We'll copy these like this and say the message prefix. Oops. And then down here, this could just be message like this, or maybe like that, if I could type. And then what this would actually insert is, whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Stop it. Fine. There we go. Prefix message like this. Now we'd have to change this a little bit. There's a couple of ways that we can actually pull this off. So clearly we're going to have two things in here now, right? And what's going to happen here if this command can take more than one argument, but we only have this if message not in args thing? You would choose it and it would offer you the message to insert, which you could say message here. And then when you hit enter, the command doesn't work and it has thrown an argument because it requires an argument prefix and it didn't get one. So what you could do is say if prefix not in args, then do the prefix input handler because that's the first argument, right? And now when we do it, we're going to get asked what the message prefix is. We could say that. And now it doesn't work because there's a required positional argument message. And this is where that next input thing comes from. So generally the way, there's a couple of ways that you could pull this off. We could say if prefix is not in the arguments, then do that. And then we could say if message not in the arguments, then return message input handler like this. And what we're going to see now when we do it is it wants the prefix, and then it wants the message, and then it inserts it into the buffer. So that works, right? But the user experience for it is not good. Remember the example that I showed when I did this? The command is create bookmark, and it's asking for the bookmark type, and we say bookmark this file. And now it's asking me for the name of the bookmark, so I could type that here. The name goes here. But I can also see the other argument to this command. And I can see what command it actually is. So I'm sort of building up the full command. I want to create a bookmark in this file with this name, or I want to create a bookmark for this view with this name. It's better user experience for you because you can actually see the command building up in there and see exactly what it's going to do. Whereas over here, it's showing me this, the message prefix, right? And then it's showing me this, the message. And by the time I'm doing this, if I get up and go get some coffee and come back, I could have forgotten that there was a prefix at all or what it was. And that's not the greatest user experience. And the reason that this is happening is that the way this whole mechanism works is the entry in here doesn't have any arguments attached to it, right? That means that when you choose, there's nothing special about this per se. When you choose this command, the command with this caption, Sublime executes this command with arguments you gave it, which is none. And the result of that, we know what the result of that is. If you do this, it blows up in your face. Well, in this case, it doesn't because it's in the command palette. But in the general case, and it has those input handlers there. In the general case, it gets mad. It says something like this: "Hey, I expected arguments and I didn't get them." And when that happens, you get this type error thing, right? Runs missing an argument. Inside of the internals of Sublime in the plugin code where it's actually executing your command, it's got a try except block around running the command to make sure that if the command throws an exception, it doesn't blow everything up. And as a part of that, it examines the message of the stack traceback to see if the reason is that there's a missing argument. And if that's the reason why it failed and the command responds to the method input, then Sublime will invoke the input method on that command instance, give it any arguments that it thought it had, which in this case is none, and do what this does. Now, if this returns none, then the command just fails. There's no input handlers. We could see that here if we did this. Then if we do this, this no longer works. It's missing two required positional arguments because this doesn't respond to input. That's what the default value for that, the default implementation for the input method is, right? It's returning none. I don't support that. Otherwise, this is going to return an input handler, and the input handler uses the name of the class or that name method that we saw in concert with actually asking you for the string or the list of items, which we'll see soonish. And once you choose it, once you commit, once you hit enter, once it's validated, that is done. It checks to see if there's another, it checks to see if there's another input, but that next input thing, this doesn't respond to it, so that default implementation returns no. So it is done. It thinks it's got collected the arguments, so it reinvokes the command again, but it invokes it with the arguments that it has now, which is that argument that it was prompted for, which in this case is prefix because that was first. And then the command fails because it requires two arguments and not one. So it runs the command, that whole process again, gets back to input and sees message and gets the second input handler. And then once you hit enter in that one, that's when it works. And this is if you did something like print args here like this, and if we went ahead and cleared the console here, we could see if I choose an example command and I choose that, and then I choose that, when we come to the console, we can see the first time it was invoked, it had no arguments. And the second time it was invoked, it had this argument, so that it got that, and then it went again. So this is one way to do this. The better way to do this, and it's sort of one of those, like, you can do this and what we're about to say here. It depends on how you want this logically to work out. The arguments go in the order of prefix, then message. Presumably, if we've set the arguments in that order, then we think that that's the logical way to ask. What prefix should I add before I insert the message? What's the message that goes after the prefix? That's why this one does prefix first and then message. So the thing here for prefix input handler could return next input, right? That's going to take a self. And it could return, oh, I think this actually takes args too. If I, yeah. It's been a bit since I've played with that. This gets some sort of argument. So we could say something like if message not in args, return message input handler like this. With just that one change, now when we run it, it asks us for the prefix. And now it's asking us for the message. We get that nice chain of items. And there's, as I said, a couple of ways that you could do this. you could, the way that it's implemented now, if I said view command just the way it is, or run command just example, then it's going to ask us for the prefix, then it's going to ask us for the message, and then it's done. And it inserts down here in the little input widget, because that's where the text command, that's where the focus was. And this input is just a standard view for most purposes. If we did view run command and we said, without caps lock turned on, prefix was this. Now it's just asking us for the message. It doesn't have to ask us for the prefix because we told it the prefix in the argument. And the result is it just does that, right? Or alternatively, we could do that the other way. We could say hi. And then instead of prefix, this is that other argument, right? This is message. And we hit enter, and now it's just asking us for the prefix, which we could type whatever we want. And as soon as we choose it, it has all the arguments it needs, and we see message hi down there. So if you wanted to support the idea that there's arguments to your command, and when you add it to the, whoops, that's the wrong thing. When you add it to this, you want to give yourself or the user of your command the option of providing no commands or no arguments, in which case it prompts for everything, or you fill in the arguments that you want and we'll just prompt for the ones that are missing. Then you could do it the way we have it right here. Or you could decide that if any argument is missing, all of the arguments are prompted for. And an example of that would be not doing this part right here. Whoops, don't do that. If this wasn't here and this was indented, then whenever prefix input handler gets called and it's time for the next input, it always asks you for the message input handler, right? And now, even if you were to run it with a message, when you do it, it asks you for the prefix and then it asks you for the message anyway, because this isn't conditional. It's always asking you. And of course, you could also get it to pull this value and to put it in there as well. Now, let's say that this is args. Yeah, this is the I haven't done this in a while. So the only thing that gets args in here is next input. So let's say we actually wanted to do that, then we need to pass args to message input handler, which means we need to implement a init method like so. And now we would say args, and then we could say self.args equals args, and then the initial text could be args.get, whoops, message with the default value of that. So now if we were to run it from the command palette, assuming I did all this correctly, fingers crossed, we hit the thing, we get the prefix, and we broke it real good. Args, maybe we might do a little bit of that so that it actually uses the variable that we created in init. That's probably the better way to do it. Okay, so fingers crossed, or as we like to say at work, watch this. We choose the command, it asks us for the prefix, and now it's the default message, hello world. That's sort of what we would expect. And then it injects it in there and breaks the code. Or if we ran it with a message of hi, then it asks us for the prefix, we give it, and the default message is the message that was provided there, right? And we could change that if we want. This is neat. Like so, and now it's injected in there like that. So this is one of those things where you have infinite freedom, if you will, to decide how you want these all to chain. I'm not sure which way I fall on that. I try to take it as a case by case basis. I kind of like the idea personally of, got to fix that or it's going to bug me, of being able to specify arguments this way, um, where I could specify exactly which ones I want and then fill them in. And I think an example of that would be this create bookmark command. I'm pretty sure it allows you to pass it an argument that tells it whether you want it to be the current file or the current view and the bookmark type. If you provided both of them, it wouldn't even ask you for this, right? And if you didn't provide one, then it would pop this up and allow you to edit things in there. I like that sort of. I find, I guess a good way to put it is I find Sublime incredibly configurable in that I can create my own plugins and I can find packages that implement things and put them into here. So as a person who's creating packages, I like to provide a sense of freedom for the people that are actually using the package to configure it the way they want. If someone wants to pop this up with a key binding and always be prompted, then they can. If they want to, if there's almost always create bookmarks as file bookmarks and never as view bookmarks, then why have to choose this? Just provide that as an argument and get on with the job of typing the name of the bookmark instead, right? That sort of thing. That's sort of why like to do it this way, but it is a bit of a longer thing. But let's go ahead and take parts of this away. And this is one of those things. We still want this to be a text command, but what we want is, say, a package, right? Let's convert this to a list input handler, which, to be honest, is probably going to be interesting because it has been a little bit since I've played with that. I think the last time was when I did this plugin here. It shows the list of all of the syntax definitions that there are, and this shows you what package it's coming from. And you might say, Python. And then you get this scratch Python buffer that is syntax highlighted and, but not backed by a file, so you don't get prompted to save it if you close the window or whatever. I find this sort of thing handy for testing things a fair bit. I think I even have a bunch of them in the command palette here, which is where these things over here are coming from. But I had ones that I used fairly often, and then I added prompt for syntax so that I could get at all the other things if I needed it. And then I just sort of got into the habit. I taught it that this is scratch buffer prompt for syntax. I tend to just use that all the time. Nice example of modifying how you use Sublime over time. But since then, I don't think I've played with list input handlers unless somebody asked a question on the forum. So we would need something like a class that is the package input handler, let's say, just to not have to implement all those extra methods, like the name method. And that's a list input handler, like so. And we could probably just do that for the time being. And what would we actually do in response to this? I guess we would probably insert, say, the name of the package. So let's do that. I'm pretty sure we would say if package not in args, then return package input handler. We don't need to worry about that one. That seems to load. And there's various methods that need to be, say, invoked here. String is required. I'm pretty sure the value of it is actually none in that case. But let's see. If I did that and did this, yeah. While you can get away with not implementing the body of a text input handler because everything mostly does the way you want, in a list input handler, you do kind of need to provide it the list of items that you're interested in. Did I go back here? Let's go in there. So it has the name, right? That works the same as it did in the text input handler. If you didn't want the name of the class to represent the name of the argument, then you could return something in the name, and we're probably going to hackify that up in just a minute. And then it has the placeholder. same as the other thing. So let's sort of go through these in order. We're going to want a list items. That's going to return the actual list of items that we're interested in, right? Which for right now is returning an empty list, which is why it's blowing up in our face. We probably want something like the placeholder, and for that we could return package to do a thing with, like so. And are we going to have initial text in the list input handler? I don't think so. And are we going to have a preview? Whoops, excuse me. I don't think we're going to do that either. We don't really care to know at this point when the input is canceled. We don't care to know when the input is confirmed. And there's no other arguments, so we don't need that. And text to show in the command palette when this input handler is not at the top of the input handler stack. Now, this is something that I probably could have shown you in that other thing, but when you do, I guess we'll do it over here. When we pick this file, this right here says this file. There's not a description method, so it's returning the list item or the thing. In the case of the text input, it's displaying, as you can see, the value of the text. In the list input handler, it would be that. Basically, if you didn't want this to be this file, if you wanted it to be bookmark type, then as a description, you could return a different string and then that would appear there. You can only see that if there's more than one argument in the list for your item. And it's also worth noting that these are an input item stack, if you will, where this is the command, then this is the first argument, and then this is the second argument. So this is the top of the stack, this is the second to most, and this is the third to the most, which is why you can backspace over text to get to the start of that. But if I did this and backspace once, I've popped the bookmark name item off the stack, and now the new item on the bookmark on the input handler stack is asking me for the bookmark type, and then I could choose a different one instead. And now it's pushed that one back on the stack. So pushing backspace is sort of like a pop. And if we go back to there, we get back to before we did anything. And if we pop one more time, the command is gone and it's just the command thing here. And that's why you'll see things like next input can return the special value Sublime plugin .back input handler, and I'm not sure why I selected that because it's already a code block. That's a specific Sentinel value. That means in response to the user pressing enter, just pretend they backspaced, go back one, which you could use to sort of create like a navigation menu, if you will. If you wanted to do something similar to, and this is something that is also, in the plans for override audit. If you said something like open resource, it shows you a list of all the packages first, and then it shows you a list of the files, and you could pick one and it'll open it, and you could pick this item and it goes back to showing you the list of packages. This could actually be in the command palette instead, in which case it would show you the name of the package and then the name of the resource. And as one of the items in the list of resources could be something that said back. And if you choose that, next input handler would return back input handler, which would be the same as going back, removing the package name off so you could select a new package. That's an example of what you would use that sort of thing for, which is not what we're going to do here, mind you. So we don't necessarily want, getting all the way back to what spun us off into that whole thing, we don't necessarily want a description here per se because there's only one argument, so at the moment anyway, so as soon as we pick it, it's just going to go away anyhow. And then what we need to implement is the item for list items, which is this one here, and we can return a list of strings, in which case they're just in there. So if we return, if we spelled return correctly and did something like first, second, now when we choose it, it's actually going to allow us to choose those things, right? And if we pick first, first gets injected, and if we pick second, second gets injected. So that's not really rocket science. We could also do something like, this, and then there's a string and there's a value, right? So this could be the first item, and this could be the second item. Now, technically, these are backwards for what's about to happen, but now, because we returned a tuple of items, when we choose that, we still see first and second in here, but what gets actually injected is the other thing. Now, realistically, what you'd actually do is put the human readable string first and then the value that you want second, right? We'll just back that back out. So that's an example of how we could do that, and Ashwin probably already knows that because I think you already have been playing with input handlers at some level. So what we have now works, right? It's going to ask us for a thing, and then it's going to do something with a thing. What's a good way for us to be able to keep prompting? Well, as we already know, the only way to do that is to have more than one argument, right? And pardon me while I take a big old glug of coffee. So the problem then becomes, if you need one argument on your run method for everything that's going to be prompted in the command palette, then for the purposes of wanting to be able to select multiple items, there's a finite upper limit on the number of items that you could add because the command has to have the argument in order for you to be prompted for it, right? But I think there's a hacky way around that particular thing. And I have in my head an idea of how it could be done, and it sort of revolves around the idea of this name function, which for right now has to return package. Otherwise, bad things are going to happen. So that should still do the same thing, right? And we're going to get to choose. Okay, now let's say we add third and fourth and fifth, just so we have a few things in this list. And like to verify, did I break it all up? Totally did. Totally did. Because I ran the command. This is one of the problems with using an insert as your item and not the printing to the console. So now, and keep in mind, I don't know if I've ever pointed that out on a stream. Things that appear in the command palette, commands that exist inside of a Sublime commands file, where this command returns yes to are you enabled and yes to are you visible. In the specific case that a command can't be found, like if this was example 4, then the command can't be found. So if you ask it, are you enabled? It essentially returns none because it doesn't exist. So it also disappears. So another way to make a command disappear from the command palette is to break it. And then it doesn't exist anymore and the command palette can't find it. So in cases where a thing seemed to work and then suddenly disappeared from the command palette, if you're not implementing those methods that hide a command or make a command hide itself, then that's the reason why that's the case. And in a similar vein, if you're implementing the description method for something like we saw last week, and in a menu you don't provide, or sorry, if you have a command in a menu like the command palette, like what we have been doing, and is there yeah, like these files here for hyperhelp, bookmark this file. This is something that I added to the thing, right? If this command is in the menu but it doesn't have a caption, then Sublime will invoke the description method on the command to ask it how it's supposed to appear. That's the thing we saw in last week's stream. But if the command doesn't exist, then in that case, the default implementation of this returns nothing, which makes Sublime input into the menu just the name of the command, but re-uppercased, if you will. For example command would appear as example, and override audit create override instead of being override underscore audit underscore create underscore override, would be the words override audit create override, all with each of those words uppercased with spaces between them. That's one of the things I was sort of fighting in last week's stream because I broke the command and I was trying to fix something. I was curious why it wasn't working, and it turned out the command was just gone. So it was actually the default caption that was being displayed there, and it just so happened that we were trying to remove that override audit prefix on the thing. Getting back to this, now that we have more than one item here, what we want to do is be able to select, say, more than one of these things. Let's say an unlimited number of these things. And I think the way to do that is this. If we add this, then there's one positional argument that's definitely required, package. And then any other arguments can be absolutely anything we want. This is just going to collect them all up as a dictionary. So we could say this, for example. And we haven't changed anything yet. So if we choose an example command, we get to choose this. And we see it run forth because that's what we picked. Or that's the argument, I should say. And we see no extra keyword arguments were provided. So that is cool. And then the next thing that we have to do here is give this the list of arguments that it's received thus far, which first time around, let's say, is none, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And then up here, we do the thing we did just a moment ago with the text input handler. We define the init method to take args, and then we say self.args equals args, like that. So now when the package input handler is invoked, it knows what arguments are already being provided to the command in addition to the one that it's about to provide. And here's where things get sketchy. What it's going to do is prompt the user to pick one of the things from this item. We can get rid of that. It's going to show this as the text in the command palette. And when you commit, it's going to call next input, right? And it's going to get self, and it's going to get the list of arguments that this command thought it had. And I'm not entirely sure this part's strictly needed yet. That's why we're sort of hacking around this. I think it's going to be needed. And we could say, well, if we return none here, if we just do this, then everything will still work the way that it always has, right? We're going to actually do it this way. We're going to choose an example command, pick like fourth, and it's going to print fourth out, and it's going to do that. Now, what we might actually want to do here is track what the user actually selected and use that to decide what to do, because we're going to get ourselves into an infinite loop in a second if we don't do that. So what we might actually want to add in here is something like this. And this is another one of those examples where I like to sort of build things up a little bit as a time. If you just sort of sit and try to wang all of this out off of memory, if you have a better memory than me, it would probably be okay, and then it'll work. But if something doesn't work, then it's trickier to try and figure out where exactly it went wrong. But if you sort of build things up on a principle by principle layer, then if it goes wrong, you know it must be the thing that you just did, right? But we're going to say confirm here, and that's going to get the text, and we're going to print confirming this and text, like so, just for now. So if we came here and did this and did example command and chose this, we'll see it says confirming third, and then it has proceeded to execute the command, right? So this is an example of us capturing exactly what the user actually chose. So what we could say here is self.thisArg, this package is equal to text, because that's going to be the package, assuming this is a list of packages, that's what the argument list is for, right? And we don't need to print it per se. We might say execute here like this, and then we could say is self.thisPackage is equal to execute, is not equal to execute, then return package input handler, and we provide the list of args, as we got them. And this is because this is the reason why we added this here, because this one's going to want to call it to sort of store that. And again, that's an example of, do we actually need that? I don't know. It'll be easy enough to remove it if we don't want it. So in this case, what do we have now? We have an example of me forgetting to apply a comma there. But apart from that, if we chose first, now it's got first in the list, and now we could choose another. We could choose third, and then we could choose fourth, and then we could choose execute, and that's the one that's going to make this not do this. It's going to say I don't have another input, right? And as a result of that, if we chose execute, we get it doing execute because that's the item that we chose. So we sort of got it building up for us, but we have this problem that this input handler, its name method essentially returns package. So every time we pick one of these things, and we could backspace over them if we wanted to and choose a different item instead. Every time we do that, it's saying the name of the argument named package is the item you just picked. And when you choose this one, that's the one we picked. So that's the one that it is. So we need to be able to change the list of arguments. And this is where it gets sketchy, because this needs to return something different if package is already in args. And conceptually, what we want to do is return either package, because that's an argument that is definitely required on our command here. And otherwise, we want to return package with an underscore and then a number, which is the number of items that start with package. And I'm not entirely sure what the best way to do that is. But if this returns something different every time, if it returned package the first time and package underscore 1 the second time and package underscore 2 the third time, then every one of the instances of this class on that stack represent different arguments. And when you choose the one labeled execute, it'll still be added as the most recent thing. So we need to know to not do something with that last one. But what we would end up with is a command executed with the name package, and then with all of those other arguments, and they're going to get caught in this kwargs thing as that extra table, which isn't happening now because name always returns the same thing, right? How are we doing on time here? Hour 18. That's not too shabby. This, incidentally, is also sort of a practice section around the idea of the plugin development course that's going to be coming soon to the alternate channel, linked in the description if you didn't already know that. They're going to be longer form videos. I'm toying with the idea of recording them sort of this way on Linux instead of on Windows, because this keyboard's easier to use. Sort of hoping that an official release of build for the Sublime Text 4 will drop so I can start that, because one of the key things to know is what version of Python do you need, and now there's going to be two. It changes some things. So I'm sort of holding off on that while I get everything else ready, but if it doesn't happen soonish, like in the next month or so, then I guess we're just going to have to launch and backfill in. So how might we pull this off? We're going to print, just to test that this is actually working, self.args every time this class gets asked what its name is. So we can see exactly in what order this happens, because I'm not 100% sure. This is why I had an idea that this was kind of a hacky way to pull this off, but I'm not sure. Choose that. It hasn't been asked yet, so we're going to choose first. And now it's already got something named package in it. Okay, and then when we choose again, now this is how we can see that it's changing every time, right? So we could say return package if package not in self.args, else return stuff, let's say. Oh, sorry. It's not a return. Return package if package isn't in the list of arguments, otherwise return stuff. There's probably a cooler way to do that, like return self.args.get package comma stuff, let's say. But like we say, we like to sort of conceptually build up how we want it to work. So now we're going to say first. And oh, we're not actually printing it there, so we can't tell if it's doing anything. Whoops. Let's do that. Order of operations is important. So it's got nothing so far. Then we choose third, let's say. And now package is third. It's coming in for the next one. Now package is third and stuff is fourth. But we're going to run into that problem where every time you pick it, it just replaces that last argument, right? So what we need to know is how many things like that start with package exist in this thing, so that we know what number to append onto the end. Or alternatively, we don't care about that per se. If I said x equals this, for example, right? If I said x.keys gives me an iterator of some sort, I suppose. Yeah, there's two of them. T's.count. Oh, actually, something like this. What's the length of that? 2. So if it only had package in it, it would be 1, right? So else package underscore %d and mod that with len self.args.keys. It's long, but I think it'll work. Let's see what happens. We got nothing. We choose the first thing. That's third. And then we choose the second thing. That's fifth, because we like to be confusing in our testing. And now we have a package and a package 1. And then we have second. And now we have that, right? And now we choose execute. And now the command is getting package 1, package 2, package 3. Interestingly, what it's not getting is package as an argument. That actually comes in this here, like so, because it's the actual argument, if you will. So we now have the ability to do what we want to do. We can select multiple things in this list. Although it would probably be nicer if this was a little less gross. We might say key is equal to this. Assuming it doesn't get called super often, then if the key was package underscore that, then you could return, as I said, self.args.get. Oh wait, can you do it this way? If, no, that's going to return the value of the thing, isn't it? Yeah, okay, so we'll just do this, else key. We'll leave it that way for the time being. There's probably a cooler way to do that. We'll find out. But for now, that's going to do what we want. Now, there's potentially more action that we want in this operation. For one thing, there's no feedback for what items to pick or not pick. You might want to actually remove one of the items from the list. And do we want to allow this? That doesn't seem like it makes a bunch of sense. It's adding the same thing twice. Second is package, and it's also package one. So that's not entirely cool. But we have the ability to do something with that because we have that ability to validate, right? So we could add a validate method. And excuse me, we're going to need that. And this is the text of the thing that it's going to do. So we need to know if there's a value in this dictionary that's like the text that we have, and if there is, return false. So we might say return text in self.args.values, I suppose, is probably the easiest way to pull that off. So if we added first, okay, that's probably one of those things that should be inverted because we want it to be allowed if it's not in the list. We don't want it to be allowed if it's in the list. And example command, choose first. Now that's done. If we try to pick it again, nothing happens, but we can pick fourth. So that's good. And now we can't pick fourth anymore, but we can choose this one, and then we get that. So that's one of those problems down. And we could actually also even test what happens if we add first, and then we backspace over it, and we can pick first because it's not on the stack anymore. That argument is being popped off, if you will. What if there was first and second, and then you try to backspace over that? Okay, so you can't go back one without doing the other. So we could say second first, for example. So that's cool. We might want to actually mark up. Let's change this to this. Don't do that, thank you. And this to this. And we might even say something like go equals execute, like this. And then we could do that, whoops, that one and that one. Oh, and say, shoot, can't do it that way. Tried to skip, did not work. Do this. Just so that the first item in the list is always that. We could say, whoa, what the heck happened there? Neat. The first thing we might want to say is if we choose this, we don't want to be able to execute the command if you haven't actually chosen a package yet, right? So we might say items is equal to this list. And then we could return items, right? So that'll still sort of do what we wanted it to do. But now execute isn't in the list, so you can't actually run the command. All you can do is backspace over it. But what we might do is idly wonder is how do you insert into a list in Python? Because that's not one of those things I do very often. You use a slice for that. Python insert item into list. Insert. Okay, well, that should have gone without saying, I suppose. If package in self.args, then items.insert into position 0, go. Okay. So we choose it. We can't execute yet. We pick the second item. Now we can execute. Now we can't. Fourth item. Now we can execute. Now we can't. So that's good. That's an example of something that we might want to pull here. So now we've controlled that. Now, the next thing we might want is to hide from this list any items that have already been chosen. Because once you add first, you don't need to add it again. And what we could do, this is the part where I wasn't entirely sure how this would work. We have all the power in the world to modify this list items list to have whatever values in it that we want, right? So one thing we could do is examine self.args, and if there's an argument whose value is first, don't add it to the list. Then once you choose this, it's no longer in there and it would just say execute second, third, fourth, fifth. That stops you from choosing the same thing again, but it doesn't give you the ability to remove it from the list except by doing this. As we just saw, we can choose items like this, and once we have it built up the way we want it to be built up, we could execute, or if that's the only item that's left. If at this point I decided I didn't want second in the list, then there's not a lot to be done about it here, because we can't go backwards over those arguments without popping all the other ones off. What we could try to do is modify self.args. We could say, for example, not remove them from the list, so it would look the way it looks now, but say that when you choose second, in that confirm or in the validate, the one where we capture the item, let's say in validate or confirm, I should say for this case, where we're saving what this current package was, so we know what to do something with, which we may or may not even need to do now. I have to double check that. As a result, instead of just saving it, we could also go into the arguments list and remove the value for the key that we no longer need. Then those arguments won't be carried forward through the command. However, it will still add the item that we added to the list, so we need to do something special elsewhere. So that's an example of, do we want to do it that way? Or do we want to just redact items from the list if they appear here? I'm not sure what the best way to do that is from a user. I like sort of, certainly from an implementation perspective, saying, oh, did you not want to have first in the list? Well, then do this. And then you can remove it and start from second and then go third, fourth, fifth, like that. And if these items were disappearing from the list every time you did it, it would be easier to pick the other items. So that works fairly nicely in that regard. Otherwise, this item, say first, would have to be in the list, but marked up to say, should I be in the list? Should I not be in the list? We're going to very quickly go over to here, because in the package pop-up, somewhere's in here, and I can't remember exactly where, and we're going to see this. I'm going to copy this line and do that. Let's paste it here. There's 2 Unicode characters here. If we were to cram this one, let's see what this does. They appear in the list, but they don't have a little check mark next to them. They have a little box, right? And if we were to change this to a 1, that's the other character. And they do have a little checkbox in the list. So another way to do this would be to start them this way. They're all there. Now this list wouldn't be hard coded here. It would have to be gathered before the command was executed because it needs to know, in our case, the actual things it's supposed to be selecting from, right? Um, and let's say that would actually be provided to the package input handler by way of an extra argument. Then we would know exactly what items were in the list that it should be doing something with. We could adjust that list as according. This falls into that where I said at the beginning that I thought of two ways to do this. The first way, without this in here, is something like the thing that we already have. We pick this, we get to build up the list of items that we want. And we would also say remove them as they appear in the list of arguments, right? So that they would just sort of, you would be selecting this, selecting that, and then they would disappear from this list as you pick them. And then when you pick execute, away you go, which requires you, as we've mentioned, you have to have them in some order, and to get rid of them, you got to backspace over them. If we subvert the list instead, we can do something like we saw way back at the beginning with the text input handler. If the command itself, and I think we can do this, I'm not sure. If the command always returns an input handler like this, oops, excuse me, then we could sort of subvert how this is working, if you will. We would sort of hard to externalize what I'm thinking of here. Okay, so maybe we got a few minutes here. Let's continue on with this particular example. So let's say the package list is equal to this, and we'll say, I don't know, override audit and package dev and package resource viewer and HTML and Python. Whoops. Like so. And we'll indent those because that's the sort of thing we like. Okay, now we come down to here. We say two things we pass to this: the arguments that this command is actually gotten thus far, which is, say, none at this point, and the package list like this. So we would have to come up here and say that this gets packages, and then self.packages equals packages like so. And wherever we call next input, we need to return self.packages to it, as well as the second argument. Now in this list, we return, say for just giggles, not package list, self.packages like so. And we have an example of, here's a list of packages like so, and we're adding them in. And we quickly see why this doesn't necessarily work. Package names are long. This is short. We're running out of space. It's hard to visualize all of the packages in this list until you do that. But we have a list of packages. So we say values equals to self.args.values, and we'll list that, right? So every time this gets called, we get a list of all of the values for arguments that we've already been provided. And in that list, we need to iterate over it for, oh, actually, this is an example of Is this the right thing? No. Can never remember. I've been doing too much of that web stuff. What's the magic, not map, but filter? Filter, I think, is the thing I'm thinking of here. Python function, 2 built-in functions. Construct an iterator from those elements of iterable for which function returns true. Iterable may be either a sequence, a container which supports iteration, or that. Filter function iterable is equivalent to. Okay. So you give it a function. Every time the function returns true, it's returned from the filter. So if we have a list of values of the arguments that are actually in there, and we might actually just print values like so we can test this out, then we don't do that. We choose this. We choose override audit. We choose HTML. We choose Python. We can see the list of packages that have been selected. And this presupposes the idea that someone hasn't invoked the command with some bogus argument. For safety's sake, we should make sure that this only does something with arguments that start with package underscore in this case, right? But those are examples of the items that were chosen by the person. And we can never quit this command because we're not inserting that item for executing the list. So values is the list of packages that have been chosen by the users. So if we said items was equal to filter, and filter takes a function and an iterable to do something with, right? And the iterable is the self.packages. We would say find all of the list of packages that we were given, and we would return something like, see, for which function returns true. I'm probably actually doing this the wrong way. I should probably say items is equal to the list of p for p in self dot packages if p not in values. That's probably the smartest, shortest way to do that, right? And then we cancel that out and we cancel that out and do that. So I imagine that's probably something like what we want. Override audit. Now override audit is gone, but executes in its place. Package dev is gone. Python is gone. HTML is gone. That's gone. If we back over that, it appears. We choose execute. We break our file. We go like so. So that's removing the list of items. That's pretty not so painless. And we go a little bit like so because we don't want that. We're going to leave that there for the time being. We might actually want to, well, no, here's the thing. We could add it at the beginning. Take it back to the way it was. This way, it doesn't appear until at the very beginning of the list, which makes it trickier to add other items, per se, unless you use the filtering. If we added it, but it does, if you were doing it by going through this, then you got to skip over the first one every time so you don't accidentally execute it. The alternative to that is putting it at the bottom, and then you have to pick it this way. So that's something that could be tweaked, maybe confirmed. I don't know. So this is one way to pull this off. And now we have it actually doing sort of what we want, right? So this is example 1, if you will. And that works. Now, the confirm is storing this. Do we actually use this anywhere? Yeah, we do. We use it in that, so we know. That's right. Okay, so this is, if you will, a quote-unquote working example of this thing. Save that. Still works. I guess we could work the command up a little bit. If we choose HTML, oh, I broke it. There we go. Every time, I swear, do that. We choose. Oh, how many times am I going to do the same thing, man? We choose new. We choose override audit and execute. And package one gets to be execute, and the first thing we picked is override audit. So in our command, we would need to know that we need to gather all the arguments from here that start with package underscore plus that one, exclude the one whose value is go. And then we have the list of all the packages to do something with. And I suppose we would do something like kwrgs dot append. Do you append to a dictionary? No, we probably just say package is equal to package like this. So for all the keyword arguments we got, pull that, and then we could say packages equals something for v in kwrgs. Oh, sorry. Okay. The value for key value in kwrgs dot items. Is items do the thing that we want? Items does the thing that we want. It returns the key and the value. Okay. If key dot starts with package. And then we could print packages and dot join packages. Okay. So according to me, watch this. Example command, we want to do something with override audit. We want to do something with package resource viewer. Go. And we, oh, I forgot an item in there, but it's sort of working. If key starts with package and v not equal to go. Okay, let's try that one more time with the proper exclusion in place. We want override audit, we want HTML, go. We're doing something with HTML and override audit. So we've successfully managed to do what we wanted. And it's even banging things in an order so you can see all of them up there in the list. So this is one way to pull this off. And let us save as this. I'm going to save as this to my home directory, like so, to keep a copy of it for safekeeping, because we're about to break it in the last few minutes of this stream. Maybe we'll go long. Who knows? We'll close that and VPF input handler tests. Get back to the version that's in my home directory, because the other thing that we can do here is not remove the packages from this. Now let's think about what we want to do here. Maybe this won't work. Maybe this might spin over to the next stream. I don't know. We need this to not display, not remove items from the list. We would say we need to add this character if it's in the list and this if it's not. Instead of removing them. So let's say if we did that as a comprehension, the same as we did that for p in self.packages. This is the one for if it's actually in the list. Whoops, I don't need to do it that way. Phew. Can you do a conditional inside that part? Should this be a traditional loop? Once you start getting into nested list comprehensions, things start to get a little tricky, and then you wish that you had brewed up a little bit more coffee. Yeah. We need to iterate over this. We don't need to care if they're in the list or not. Uh, this is harsh. Let's see. Oh, go away. Go away. We want the string percent %s percent %s modded for, let's say, pre package. Can we do this for self for ins? No, I don't think you can. I think we might have to do it the other way. For package in packages. So we might say items is just an empty list. For package in packages, items dot append mod pre package. Instead of pre, it would be this. If package in values, else this, and it would be a 0 instead. And remove that. So that is broken, I think. No? Oh. All right. Yeah, that's what I thought. Oh, right. Again, if one were to apply the appropriate accessors to this thing, then we could go in like so. Maybe jam one of those in there, which is the reason why I wanted to do it that way and not just a concatenation to begin with, but I could only remember so far. Now, oh yeah. Yeah, we've sort of kind of doesn't work because the key and the value are both the same thing. So we need to do that thing where we return this, comma, package. Oh, sorry. Good grief. Take that back. This is the value that's going in for that whole thing, which is this even, no, there was one more thing in there, boy. No, that's the thing, huh? Whoops. Oh, don't do that. No, I'm going the wrong way. There we go. Kind of confused myself with that one. Append is going to there. That's the second value in that thing. Yeah, okay. So this represents the first value. We wrap it, and then we add a package on the end. Yeeksy. Okay, that kind of does what we want. Now override audit is in there. Unfortunately, that's still displaying the wrong thing. And that's not allowing us to choose them because they're already in the list, which is the second part of this operation. The first is, did I get these in the wrong order again? Perhaps I did. The thing that's returned, whoops, take it back, okay. What the hell thing does this line up with? That one lines up with that one. That one lines up with that one. Yeah, that's what I thought. This one's package. This one's that. Okay. The thing that you're going to return, then the thing you're going to see. I always tend to get that backwards. Unless I got it backwards both times, in which case it's now wrong. So override audit. Yeah, that's what I thought. Let's take a look over here. The string, then the value. I had that right the first time. Then the string is shown to the user and the value is used as the command argument. Yeah, see, so why? Well, I guess this is an example of that other method we need to do something with. Okay, so yeah, okay. Remember that thing that I mentioned that we probably didn't need? The text is shown in the command palette when this input handler is not at the top of the input handler stack. Defaults to the text the user entered. The text the user entered is that one. So we need a thing in here that is def description. They are checkboxes within the list input handler, yes. Well, technically they're not real list boxes. They're just a Unicode character that looks like a checkbox, which is a nice, little end run on things. There are other examples of packages that do stuff like that. Git gutter, for example. If you use git gutter, which was like my go-to thing before the incremental diff was added to Sublime to give us those native things in the gutter, it uses regions to be able to mark up lines that are modified, and if you hover over it, it pops up a little pop-up, and in there what looks like graphical buttons, they're really just Unicode characters. It's a good way to inject graphic-y type stuff, assuming the user's font handles that sort of thing. The text to show in the input. Now, this is interesting because I'm not entirely sure why text is returned in that as a particular. Desk is that. Okay. Oh. Maybe if it was spelled correctly, then it would actually be invoked. Description takes 2 positional arguments, but 3 were given. Self-feed. I don't think this actually takes a text argument at all, to be perfectly honest. I think the documentation might be incorrect on that one. No, it's always 3, huh? All right. How about this? Oh, right. Yeah. It says text here, but what you actually get is the whole item from the thing that's returned from the list thing. Package input handler object has no. Really? Object? Object? Let's do that. Wait, did I have that right? This. Oh. Right. Okay. Yeah. Oops. It's in there, but it's not on the stack anymore. The idea here is this one is for picking packages, if to do packages as a whole and not the individual overrides. So in theory, the list of packages should be fairly small. For actually doing multiple distinct overrides, that's going to be something completely different, unless this doesn't really work out. So sort of have that, multiple angles idea. Some of this is sort of coming at the same problem from multiple angles to provide multiple different workflows for the thing. And then over time, if one of them seems to stick more than the other, then you could sort of drop one in favor of the other at some level. If this was a work project, then we'd hope that someone had done a feasibility study of some sort to determine what users actually want to see. But for something like this, override audit isn't a particularly highly installed package. So even asking all the people that have installed it, you don't get a large user base there without having some real world experience. Okay. Okay, and of course, I would pick the wrong thing. Okay. We want the text to be in there and not the value. Of course, we want the text to be in there and not the value. It was displaying the value in there, and that's not the thing we wanted. Or that list is backwards. So if you pick override audit, it's in the list as override audit, and it's checked. And you can't pick it. Every time you do, that's interesting. I've never noticed that does that before. Then we might say HTML, and now there's two things in there. And if you take that one out, it's not there. And if you add it in, it is. And then when you pick execute, there you go. So that's kind of nice. So that's sort of doing what we want there. And again, the order of items in this is string, comma, value. Optionally return a tuple of list items selected item index to indicate an initial selection. Ah, that's interesting. Let's try that. List item, selected item index. Let's do this. So I'm curious. If we did this. Okay, so we can make our lives a little bit easier here. If package is in args, that's when we add that go string to the top, which is the one that adds that execute. So if this is the case, then we could return items and 1 like this. Otherwise, just return the list like so. And then when you come in, you're just at the first item, that's the package, then you add 1. And then when it comes back, execute is at the top, but it automatically jumped the cursor to the next item down. Although this is kind of broken because I think I executed it while it was inside of that thing. Let's maybe do this instead, because I'm getting tired of doing that. Okay. Override audit, package dev, package resource viewer. We could actually even make that kind of smarter, maybe by counting through the items to find the first one whose value isn't checked and put the cursor there. That seems like it wouldn't be too hard to do either, per se. I was verifying that I'm inserting these as the string to do and then the value. So text value, text value, text value, text value. We want that to be text. Actually, this seems to be backwards, isn't it? Because the first item in here is text, and it's the one with the little checkbox on it. But down here, oh no, text is the second item, the value that it's being returned. So I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, but by the same token, the description method is kind of broken in its documentation because it says you're getting a single item and you're not. You're getting potentially more than one in a list item. This is true in a text input handler, but it's not in an list input handler. Let's do this. I'll bring that over here. Just in case that happens to have changed. Where was my mouse cursor? I'm blind. There we go. Name, placeholder, description text. The text is shown in the command palette when it's not at the top. And the list input handler has, value, comma, text. The text to show. That's interesting. Maybe my help is broken. Value, comma, text. So, okay, it's described as going in the other direction. So if this was value and this was text, then what we actually want is in fact the value. So that actually does what one might expect. All right. Can we check a box all in one go? Not using this, no. You can only pick one thing at a time from the list, and then it cycles back to the top. Another way to do this sort of would be to remove them from the list entirely and then use that preview at the bottom to show them. But there's not a good way to add more than one in here. There's sort of tricks you can play with. Well, here's an example of something that I don't think a lot of people know. If you open, well, that's a bad example. Let's get a window that has an actual list of something interesting in it, like this. Okay, and if I was to close all the items in this window or in this little view group, like so, if I push Control P, that's go to anything, right? There's a list of all these files in here. And as you choose them, they're sort of transiently opened behind you. Notice there's not a tab associated with it yet because it's not officially open. If you push escape, the file goes away, right? And if you decide it's the one you want, you push enter, it opens, the tab appears, but the go to anything box closes. However, if you have go to anything open and you're scanning through and you're like, yeah, the change log, I want to edit the change log, then you push the right arrow, that file is opened, and now we can continue looking through what else might we like to open? The contributing file, right click. Now that file is open too, and then we come through here and then we want init.py and we push the right arrow. I think I said right click, but I'm pushing the right arrow on the key. On the keyboard, and then that file opens, and then you find the next one and push right, and away you go. And then when you hit that, now you've opened multiple files, all with this panel open. And to some degree, you can sort of pull that off doing something like this is a quick panel. We can type some text in here. I think I can't remember. I've never done it myself, but there's a package that does do this, where you can sort of gin up a keyboard context that in a custom event handler that can tell that the quick panel is open in the current view or in the current window, because I think there's only one of these allowed per window. And then you could handle pushing the right arrow key to take an action. That would sort of be a way to do that, but as I recall, that's kind of a hacky thing to do. If it's not pushing the content of the file into a view, then what's it pushing it into? You mean when you do this? When you don't see a tab at all for the file, like this, you don't see any tab up here yet, but we are seeing sort of the content of the file, then this is sort of what we refer to as a semi-transient view. There is actually a view associated with this. There's special, I don't want to say properties because that's not right, but for example, this is an example of a view that's not transient at all. It's a normal view. And as a result of that, if you said view.window, it gives you the object, the window object that it's associated with. Over in this case, and it's not really possible to do this outside of a plugin. I think if you did something like this, and it's not quite working because the wrong thing has got the focus, but when this tab doesn't exist here and it's a semi-transient view, and I think in that case, I could be wrong, but it returns as not being a part of the window. Or if it does return a window, it doesn't report itself as being in one of the view groups. You can say, get the list of file groups, which right now there's 3. And then for any view, what group are you in and what index are you in that group? 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. In this case, it's group 0, but its index would be like -1. It doesn't exist. It's not technically part of the window because it hasn't been opened yet. Once you push enter or right, then the tab appears. So it is actually a real view now. And then our cursor is back there in the file. And we can continue on. And the little preview behind there is showing inside the current tab. But if we push escape, the actual content of the file comes back. That's because that semi-transient view isn't real in sort of an airy-fairy kind of way. But once you decide to open the file, then it is associated with a tab. The other aspect to this, and this is one of those things that is very commonly asked in the forum, is we come over here to the command palette and, sorry, the sidebar. You click on a file once, then you think it's opened because a tab appeared. And you say, okay, that file is open. I also want to edit diff report. And as soon as you click on it, the other file goes away and this one arrives. And that makes you think that you can only open one file at a time. But if you look closely, the text of this tab, and I'm not sure how well it shows up in the recording, is italicized. And that means this is a transient view. This is sort of a preview of a file. It's allowing us to say, is this the file I want? 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 Without having 20 tabs appear in this group that you have to close. If you actually want to open a file, you have to double click it. You see that when you do that, the text of the tab goes from being italicized to being regular, like so. Or while this transient tab is here, as soon as you make a modification, you've registered an interest in wanting to modify it, so it automatically converts to a regular tab. So technically, yeah, it's in a view, but it's not necessarily associated with any tab because it's not technically part of the window until you decide you want it. And if we were to come back to here, we get things like these undocumented methods for determining the transient sheet in a group and the transient view in a group, which aren't documented. We only know they exist because they're in the plugin file that represents the actual thing. That I think sort of gives you the reference to that value from a plugin, so you could use that to see. But the window.openFile thing has arguments that you can pass. One of them is, and this is something that I don't think was actually mentioned in a Devember video. It's something that I thought I was going to mention in a Devember video, and then I didn't. And then I made the next video assuming I did. And then by the time I realized that I hadn't actually said it, I'd already recorded the thing and I was editing it. So I just popped up a panel at the bottom to mention it. You can pass in this flag to say that when you're opening the file, you want to add like :6 to go to line 6. You can force it to go into a group, and you can specify sublime.transient to open it as a preview only. So as we see here, it won't have a tab assigned until it's modified. So I suppose we could do something like window.openFile, and the file we want to open is home tmartin and input handler tests.py. And then we could say flags are equal to sublime dot, that thing I can't remember what it is, transient, like this. And as long as this group has the view of the focus, doop, oh, it opened it. Oh, shoot. Is this the wrong file there? Ah, that's interesting. It returned a view that already existed without actually opening it. Oh, actually, I guess I was expecting a tab to appear, even though the help specifically said. So check it out. The tab says hyperhelp, but the content of this file is that one, or the version of that one that I saved in my home directory a minute ago. So this is totally transient. Clicking here brings back the actual help. Um, so that view is gone. But if we did that again, if I was to make a modification to this, a view pops into existence because now it's being converted away. It's being converted to a non-transient view. This is one of the things, if you're in the Discord, sometime last month, there was a question and John was around. The idea of those semi-transient views uh, don't there's not anything in the API that represents them. And that's why I think I might be kind of using that terminology wrong, because there are two different ways for a view to be transient. One's this one, and one's a different, more ephemeral way that it's still visualized but not seen. That other one, not this one, is something that's not it's not exposed by the API. It's just something that Sublime just sort of does on its own, if you will. Um, but I think we're gonna call it there as a stream. It's been 2 hours and 16 minutes. Woo, went not too long. So, or not too shabby on the whole. So I'm not sure. I might have find time to work on this throughout the week, in which case this won't be continued into next week's stream, and we'll see what is happening there. But here's sort of um, the idea that I had, and I'm not quite sure how to realize it just yet because there's a little bit of a hurdle. But imagine it looked like this, and you chose package dev. It appears up there in that list right now, and it appears checked, and it stops us from being able to do anything with it, right? If, as in a consequence of running this, right now we're saying when you run the command, if there's an argument named package that doesn't exist, use a package input handler to ask for the user, and that's what's doing that whole thing, right? And this just keeps returning instances of itself where it changes the name slightly every time so that each invocation can represent a different argument. And we're passing into the input handler the global list of packages because we're assuming that it's being gathered from some other means. Something about this command knows what the input handler should be displaying in its list, but we don't want that to be hard coded in the input handler, so we need to pass it in. So that's why we need to apply an init here. Possibly we add an extra argument provided to this, which would be added as an argument here and stored as an instance variable, just like these two, which gets passed as the third argument to in this one when it's called in next input. So every time you pick a package, the new instance is created and that carries over. But we use the confirm to not only set this text so we know what to do, but also to inject items into that list that we provided that starts out empty, so that there's some list that's actually tracking the list of items that have been added to this thing as it goes along. And in that case, if you were to choose an item that's already in the list, then you could remove it in confirm here. Instead of adding it to that list that we're passing, you could remove it instead and make this mark them up based on not whether it's an argument to this command, which is what it's currently doing, or yeah, the list of packages which we were provided, if it's not in the values, not in the list of arguments, but if it came from that extra list that we added, then what we would end up with is something like you pick package dev, and now package dev has a check mark in it. And if you picked package dev again, instead of validate returning no, this validate wouldn't be here. And the response from the command to that would be to remove package dev from the list of arguments um, instead of adding it. Then the next time the input handler came around, the checkbox would be gone because it's no longer in that secondary list. And as a result of that, you could pick a thing to add it, and you could pick it again to remove it. Now, what we need to do there is somehow convey that extra list that is created in the input method here to be able to do that. And I think like one way to do that would be to have it be an instance variable in this command, because there's one instance of text command created for every file that's being edited. If you added an init to this, you'd notice that when you save the plugin, a whole bunch of, if you added an init and you add a print in the init to know when it gets called, then when you save the plugin, you'll see it being called a bunch of times for all the views or some of the views that exist. And sometimes it doesn't get created again until the first time that view gets accessed somehow. And every time you open a new file, you'd see it getting invoked. And every time you created a new tab, if you just created an empty file, you'd see it getting invoked. There's one text command created for everything. That's how it knows that self.view is its own specific view. There's multiple instances of text command. The same thing happens for window command. There's one created for every window, which is why for some things you would create a window command instead of a text command if you don't need to access the buffer, if you don't want a bunch of instances of your class laying around. And application command, there's only ever one no matter what, no matter how many windows, how many views. That's one of the main distinctions between the three different kinds of commands that you can have inside of a plugin. So it would be possible for this command to have an instance variable that was the list of things. Then we still need this to be implemented this way. We need there to be a definite argument that this gets that we don't provide in its entry in there to make sure that the input handler gets called at all and that we get prompted in the command palette. And then we still need to do this here. But when this actually gets called with an argument of package, the package that gets invoked with would be the one that was labeled execute. And instead of using the rest of the arguments in kwargs here, you just pluck them out of that list that you added that was passed in here, that other thing was just sort of editing in line. That would allow us to do that. And the other thing that we would have to do is not call next input here, which is where I think this gets a little tricky. I think we also need name to never return package, or if you will, it should return package if the selected item last time was go. This is where I'm not quite sure how it would shake out, because what you would want to have happen is, again, that thing we saw way at the beginning of the stream with the multiple arguments, where instead, if you don't call next input, then you pick this, you choose an argument, next input returns none, so it thinks it's done. And because name didn't return package, the command would fail because the argument is missing. So it would cycle back and call it again and come back into here. And then basically what we would end up with is these checkboxes showing the items that were picked that are sort of being gathered from invocation to invocation and stored in an instance variable. But we wouldn't see package dev up here in the list of things. It would say add a package to do something with, or select package to work with instead. And then there'd have to be a special case for execute being in here when you know there's more than one thing checked. And in the specific case of this, that's where the input handler would need to know it needs to do something. That's the part I'm not 100% sure on, which is why we're not going to embark upon it in this particular stream here. With that said, we are going to call an end to this particular stream. I hope this was in some way elucidating to the idea of input handlers, and there's a fair amount of user interface that you can create with them that wasn't technically possible previously before they were added. And it's sort of one of those things where you want to try and see, of all the things we can do in plugins that we need to collect input for, what could we use an input handler for? Is there a way we could do something like that that sort of makes life better in some way, instead of having, traditional Sublime just has that input line at the bottom of the window? Actually be able to get content up in the main area of the window as you're doing things. And can we implement commands with arguments and input handlers that allow you to do these sorts of things and make it seem more interactive and cool? Instead of having 30 commands in the thing, you can maybe just have a couple and choose them from sort of like an extra list with a lot less work than you might otherwise expect. So that's all we got for this one, and definitely going to have a stream next week. I don't think there's anything exciting happening except my dog getting a haircut, and that doesn't happen until Friday. So not entirely sure what would be a nice topic to have for that particular thing. So if you have an idea for something that you'd like to see in a live stream, then hit me on Twitter at OdatNurd. That didn't do anything at all, did it? Let's try it again. Oh no, did I break it? Oh, I might have broken it. Oh, it's not in this particular thing. Oh, that's unfortunate. Never mind. I have a lower third, but I forgot it's not in the webcam scene. Hit me on Twitter at OdatNurd if you have an idea for something that you'd like to see done in a live stream, a plugin idea that you had that you weren't sure what to do something with, something with the API that you're unclear of. If there's another topic, something like this, where we could sort of, elucidate you, that sort of thing. And we will go from there. Or perhaps we'll work on override audit or tweaking up some help in hyperhelp as well. Although I'm thinking that I'm not going to do too much more on hyperhelp until Will finishes the changes that he needs to make to package control to support uh, dependencies in the new version of Sublime, because then I think we're going to move hyperhelp from being a dependency that lives in the packages folder to being in the regular folder, and we can make a lot of it a lot nicer instead. But until that next live stream, this is OdatNurd wondering what thing he was pressing here. Oh yeah, I guess that one. All right. Until the next live stream, where I hopefully get a little bit better at working the controls on my stream. This is OdatNurd asking you to please have a sublime day.